Hello, friends, and welcome to the Pines. From devils in disguise to ex-boyfriends run amok, today's chilling tales explore what happens when a Halloween party goes bad. It was Halloween night, 1997. Our local amusement park had just reopened for its annual 21 and up Halloween party. Earlier that evening, it had been full of families, kids in costumes, and hayrides. But now, with a sliver of moon peeking out from behind the roller coasters, the park transformed into a haunted playground. The workers were all in costume, the lights dimmed, and the air buzzed with an unsettling energy. I was there with my friends, John and Chris, ready to make the most of the night. We were all dressed up for the occasion. I was a vampire, John was a pirate, and Chris, as usual, was the guy who just threw on a mask and called it good. We were having a blast. We even met a group of girls, Amy, Molly, and Sarah, who were just as eager to enjoy the chaos. As we sat around a bench, sipping on beers, the sounds of the night seemed to take on a life of their own. Echoing laughs, distant screams from the roller coasters, and the occasional moan of an employee dressed as a zombie wandering by. That's when he appeared. A figure dressed all in black, with a red devil mask, stood off to the side of our group, staring at us. At first, we thought he was part of the event, one of the workers trying to freak people out. There was a new ride in the park called the Devil's Playground, a twisting, looping monstrosity that everyone was lining up to ride. It made sense that they'd have someone like him roaming around, scaring guests. But there was something off about him. He just stood there, didn't say a word, didn't move, just watched. John, never one to back down from a challenge, called out, "Hey man, you want a beer?" The devil figure slowly walked over, taking the drink from John's hand. Without a word, he tilted the can, pouring it out slowly on the ground, before handing it back to John. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps barely audible over the clattering noises of the park. We all stared at each other, confused and a little uneasy. "Weird guy," Chris muttered. John shook his head. "What a jerk," he groaned. But we brushed it off, getting another round and continuing on with the night. We kept splitting up and reconnecting to go on rides or grab food and drinks. But after about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen John and Amy in quite a bit. None of the others had either. While we thought it was odd they didn't say goodbye, we all figured they had just snuck off to find a quiet, more private location. We figured they'd turn up soon enough. In the meantime, Sarah suggested riding the scrambler. While I wasn't particularly in the mood, I couldn't resist. Sarah was super hot. She leaned in close as we got on the ride, her warmth making the cold October air seem like a distant memory. After the ride, Chris and Molly were waiting for us by the exit. "We're going to go grab some more drinks," Chris said. I handed him some cash, and Sarah and I went to find a bathroom. When we returned, there was no sign of our friends. We searched the area, asking guests if they'd seen them, but no one had. Everyone was too drunk, too distracted by the eerie atmosphere of the party. I felt my first real pang of panic. We flagged down a few employees, but they were indifferent, too busy with the night's festivities to take us seriously. And then, in the distance, we saw him. The devil, standing against a wall, just watching us. He lifted his hand and gave us a slow wave, motioning for us to come toward him. Sarah clutched my arm tight. "Let's just go back," she whispered, her voice shaky. "This is too weird." But I thought I'd figured it out. Our friends had put this whole thing together. They were going to jump out and scare us. I decided to play along. "Maybe he knows where they went," I said. The devil turned and started walking. Sarah hesitated, but I nudged her. "Come on, it'll be fine." He led us through the park, out of sight of the main paths, and past an employee-only gate. We followed, hearts pounding, but I figured it was just part of the prank. He walked quickly, keeping a healthy distance as we followed, losing him momentarily as he disappeared through a door. It was pitch black when we followed him inside. "I don't like this," Sarah said. A light flickered on above, casting a shadow of the devil's figure in a doorway. "There," I said. We hurried to catch up, climbing a set of metal stairs that led to a second-floor door. It shut just as we reached the top. My heart raced as I grabbed the door handle and threw it open. But the room was empty. Cold. Silent. There were no jokes, no jumps, no friends waiting to scare us. Just darkness. The door at the back of the room stood ajar, and I called out, "Guys? John? Chris?" No reply. Sarah was freaking out now, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to go back. This isn't funny anymore," she begged. But it was too late. Something cold gripped my gut. I stepped closer to the back door, my pulse pounding in my ears. I pushed it open, and that's when I saw them. Our friends, piled on the floor, lifeless, covered in blood. Sarah screamed, but I barely heard her. My vision blurred as I grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the room. I expected the devil to leap out of every shadow or burst from behind every closed door. But he didn't. We ran, stumbling down the stairs, out of the building, and back to the main part of the park, screaming for help. The rest was a blur. Security, then police, confusion. We were questioned for hours. They thought we were responsible at first, but other witnesses confirmed seeing the devil, and the park employees said they didn't have anyone in such a costume working for them. The devil hadn't been part of the show. He was a killer. The following months were a haze of funerals, grief, and the weight of knowing we'd lost our friends in such a brutal way. Sarah stayed with me for a while, too afraid to go back home. We helped each other through the pain, but as time passed, we drifted. Each of us saw the other as a reminder of the worst time of our lives. The park closed after that, and never reopened. It became a legend unto itself, known as the Devil's Playground. It's been more than 20 years since it happened. I've tried to move on, and I've been mostly successful. I met an amazing woman, got married, and had kids. Life goes on, for the living. But sometimes, late at night, when my wife and kids are asleep and the house is quiet, I think about my old friends. I wonder why the devil spared me and Sarah. But mostly, I wonder if he's still out there. It was Halloween in 1998, a night bubbling with excitement as my friends and I stepped into the pulsating heart of Club Vortex. The bass thumped in sync with our carefree spirits, each beat pulling us deeper into the vibrant chaos. Dressed as a flapper, I felt a rush of nostalgia, like a college party. But this time, the stakes felt higher, the thrill more intoxicating. The dance floor glowed with laughter and neon lights. Mary, Abby, and I twirled through the crowd, drinks in hand, our eyes scanning for the most eligible bachelors. A bullfighter caught Abby's attention, while Mary practically melted against Batman's brawny frame. I found myself lost in the arms of a tall guy in a pinstripe suit, complete with a fedora. We laughed, we danced, and as shots flowed, the night began to blur. As the evening wore on, I didn't notice the newcomers. They slipped in like shadows, a dozen men in camouflage, their faces concealed beneath dark caps. "Look at all the army guys," Mary mumbled, leaning heavily against Batman, her words slurred with the sweetness of too many drinks. I looked up as one of the men moved to the center of the dance floor. Even when he raised the gun high, I thought it was just a part of his costume. It wasn't until he fired that the reality of the moment shattered my illusion. 3 deafening shots echoed through the club, slicing through the laughter like a knife. The music cut abruptly, leaving behind an oppressive silence that was soon engulfed by chaos. Screams erupted, panic igniting the air like a match to gasoline. I dropped to the ground, heart racing, my mind fighting the urge to flee, but all I could do was watch. "Get on the ground," the man barked, his voice steady and commanding. "Empty your pockets, hand over your purses." The once jubilant clubgoers, now mere shadows of their former selves, scrambled to comply, fear gripping us all. A drunken vampire, a guy dressed in a faux cape and fangs, hesitated, clearly disoriented. Before I could even process what was happening, one of the men lunged forward, striking him viciously across the face. The vampire crumbled to the ground, a sudden silence falling over the dance floor as a heavy boot connected with his ribs. The sound echoed, visceral and jarring, stirring something primal in me. I pressed my face against the cool tiles, fighting the urge to scream. My friends were beside me, but their whispers were drowned out by the shouts and the chaos unfolding. I couldn't close my eyes. I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I caught glimpses of other partygoers, faces twisted in terror, purses tossed aside, jewelry scattered across the floor. Suddenly a figure near the exit made a break for it, bolting toward freedom. "Don't move!" one of the men shouted, and in an instant the sound of another gunshot pierced the air. The man fell, a lifeless heap on the dance floor, blood seeping into the vibrant colors of the night. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. "Get on the ground!" the leader screamed again, and I knew I had to listen. I pressed my face into the floor, the cold tiles grounding me as terror engulfed the room. A black boot stepped inches from my face. I held my breath as a hand reached down and snatched my bag. The heavy hand reached toward my neck. "It's fake! It's fake!" I yelled. He ignored me and tore the gaudy costume necklace off my body. I whimpered and shut my eyes tight. It felt like hours, but in reality, it only lasted minutes. They moved with terrifying precision, collecting valuables and instilling fear. Then, just as suddenly as they arrived, they vanished, slipping back into the night like phantoms, leaving chaos in their wake. The club was alive with the sound of sobs, the sharp scent of fear hanging in the air like a thick fog. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer as the first police cars pulled up outside. Officers rushed in, quickly assessing the scene, their presence a faint promise of safety. But the aftermath was devastating. A man was dead, and several other people were injured. The reality of the night settled heavily on us. As the police took statements, I felt the weight of the horror wash over me. Parents and loved ones trickled in, faces pale with worry, searching for familiar figures in the chaos. I clung to Mary and Abby, our bond strengthened by the trauma of that night. A coworker eventually arrived to take us home. The drive was surreal, the world outside lit by street lamps, oblivious to what had just transpired. The radio buzzed with the news, details of the attack already spreading like wildfire. "They're still looking for the men in camouflage," the reporter's voice echoed ominously. The story dominated the headlines for weeks, but they were never found. Every shadow felt like a lurking reminder of that night. We went back to our lives, but a part of us was forever changed. A memory of laughter turned into screams. A Halloween celebration morphed into a chilling reminder of reality. As I lay in bed that night, the adrenaline finally waning, I closed my eyes, trying to erase the images that haunted me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, waiting, watching, and ready to strike again. The Halloween Chase. The crisp October night was alive with the sounds of laughter and music floating across the field as we pulled up for the party. Jay and Blake were with me, and despite the chill in the air, the excitement buzzed like static electricity. It was the first real high school party any of us had ever attended. We handed over $5 in exchange for red Solo cups and headed straight for the keg. I wasn't a big fan of beer, but I figured a sip here and there wouldn't hurt. I wanted to look cool, after all. Jay immediately began chatting up a cute girl named Amber. Blake and I mingled with her friends. The girls were from a school a few towns away. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of thrill and potential trouble. We had been chatting with the girls for nearly an hour when a truck came roaring up, skidding to a stop nearby. 4 guys hopped out, and one of them, a big dude with a menacing look, stomped over with fire in his eyes. "What's the deal, Amber? You don't respond to texts anymore?" Amber stood her ground. "We broke up weeks ago, Adam. You need to get over it." He scoffed, his voice rising. "We're not broken up until I say so." Jay tried to calm the situation, offering Adam a drink, but the big guy wasn't having it. I could tell Jay didn't want to back down in front of Amber, but his voice quivered as he told Adam to leave. Before things escalated further, a blaring siren cut through the night. We had never been so glad to see the cops. "Run!" I shouted, adrenaline surging as the crowd erupted into chaos. We dashed towards Blake's mom's minivan, piling inside with the girls. The engine roared to life, and we tore away from the scene, hearts pounding. After a few minutes of driving, we felt safe. Surely the cops would have their hands full enough back at the party. "Let's hit the diner for some coffee," Blake suggested, relief washing over us. Seated at the table and splitting a plate of fries, Amber shared the horror of her situation with Adam. He was an older guy that turned increasingly creepy once they started dating. "He's been calling and texting me non-stop since I broke up with him," she said. "He even sent flowers to my house." As we sipped coffee, I couldn't help but feel a mix of sympathy and apprehension. After we finished, we dropped the girls off at Amber's house, planning to head back to Jay's to play video games all night. But just as Blake started up the car, a truck's headlights snapped on behind us. "It's them!" Jay shouted, panic erupting. "Drive!" Blake slammed his foot on the gas, but the minivan was sluggish. The truck roared behind us, a predatory beast. "Faster! Faster!" Blake pushed the accelerator, hitting 65 in a 35, but the truck easily matched our speed, engines growling. Without warning, it swerved into us. Blake swerved to avoid a tree, but we careened off the road and landed in a ditch. The van was stuck. "Get out! Get out! We need to run!" I unbuckled my seatbelt and burst from the minivan, followed closely by Jay and Blake, as the truck came to a screeching halt up ahead and busted a U-turn, heading back toward us. We bolted into the woods, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The darkness closed around us, and the sounds of pursuit filled the air. I lost sight of my friends as we stumbled through the dark woods. Then I heard it, shouts and taunts from behind. I ducked into a bush, heart racing. A moment later, Jay stumbled into a clearing up ahead, Adam hot on his heels. Adam tackled Jay from behind, slamming his head onto the ground, then punching him several times as Adam's friends emerged from the woods. Adam stood and brushed dirt off his clothes. "Get him up," he yelled, and his friends grabbed Jay, holding him tight. "You need to learn not to mess with another guy's girl," Adam said, and punched Jay hard in the stomach. I was frozen, and it took me a moment to snap out of it. But then, propelled by fear and a sense of loyalty, I leapt from my hiding place. I aimed a punch at the nearest guy, a tall, wiry dude with a goatee. He barely flinched and grinned at me. "I'll take this one," he said, stepping forward. As I braced for a fight I knew I would lose, a loud rustling came from the opposite side of the clearing. Blake charged through the darkness, wielding a hefty tree branch like a weapon. Before Adam could react, Blake swung the branch like a baseball bat, striking him right in the face. The crack of bone echoed through the night, and Adam crumpled, blood spraying from his shattered nose, his friends momentarily stunned. Without hesitation, Blake swung twice more at Adam's limp body, and then looked up at his friends. "You want some?" he roared, his eyes wild. No, just let us get him out of here," the guy with the goatee shouted, holding up his hands in surrender. "Then do it now," Blake commanded. They dragged Adam away, half carrying him toward the truck. We followed at a safe distance, hearts still racing. Once they were out of sight, we stumbled down the street, adrenaline fading to disbelief. We still couldn't get the van out of the ditch, so Blake had to call his mom. He explained the accident by telling her that a deer had run into the street, and he swerved to avoid it. She had no reason to doubt his story and was just relieved we were all okay. Amber later told us that Blake hadn't just broken Adam's nose, he'd also shattered his jaw. To our surprise, she got back together with him after that, insisting that he had changed. For months after that night, we kept looking over our shoulders, but Adam and his friends never came looking for us. This past year, when Jay and I went to visit Blake at college, his girlfriend asked us why we call him Slugger. Our eyes lit up, and we recounted that harrowing night, a tale that one day we'll be sure to tell his kids. If you enjoyed today's stories, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you next time with more whispers from the Pines.